Hey, good morning. Actually, good afternoon. It's Ken at Tortoise Capital. This is our morning scheduled Q&A session happening this afternoon on September 5th. Happy birthday to me, 63. Today was just a funny day so far. It's not even over yet. And I'm going to talk about mindfulness, which is triggered by the question of the day from Pavel, who says, on Thursday night's podcast, so that would have been September 3rd, we were talking about how to manage initial risk, and I mentioned that the real question was how to manage reentry in order to simplify the decision about managing the initial risk. My point was that you've already identified the trigger point at which you're going to get out when your hypothesis is disproven in the way that you framed the trade and identified that stop. So it has either hit that or it hasn't. So there's no cognitive effort required in deciding. It's really just sense and respond. But the inner talk that we get when we feel like it's starting to go against us and we see it heading towards that decision, and maybe we feel an urge to get out now instead of realizing the entire loss that we had already accommodated with a rational mind. But no, we want to maybe get a little bit because we are feeling the uncertainty that is a natural reflection of the state of nature in the trade. I mean, we're entering trades where the very state of uncertainty is what creates the conditions for a strong trade in either direction. When that's the case, you have a critical state. That's the maximum moment of uncertainty. So to feel feelings of uncertainty is the least surprising moment of all. So how do we manage that? Well, in my view, and what I talked about Thursday night, was that if you have reentry as part of your trade frame, which you do if you're trade framing according to our standard work, then you've already anticipated what you're going to do if you get out and then it goes back in your direction, and you know where and when and why you're going to get back in. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that visually. And by committing to that reentry strategy and being satisfied with it in your head, heart, gut, hands, and feet, the 5 locations of knowing, well then, you've offloaded some of the cognitive complexity that comes from worrying about things in the middle of a decision cycle. You can get that out of your supply chain because it's not adding value. It's just creating friction, noise, heat, sapping energy, and adding to the uncertainty. It's a reinforcing feedback loop. So I'll talk about that today. Pavel says, I find it difficult to enter the trade that is not clear and has a slight up or down move. For example, something that's an SQC, sideways quiet channel, but is actually moving up or down. And that's the normal case, unless it was exactly no change in price for the last 10 bars, which is extraordinarily rare. So there's always some moment of up and down inside a larger frame that we've created and named as SQC. He says, I suppose I should just stay away from these trades. And I'm going to say no to that with the following idea, that if you stay away from those, you may be avoiding a pattern that is exactly the one that you want. And it's really coming to a reconciliation and an accommodation with what to do about the feelings and what to do about those prices, and then turn that into a trade frame that is mechanically precise that you can work on. He says, my experience is that I get chopped up when the move up or down is indecisive. That's the definition of chop. And when I decide to override the rules, not only are you getting chopped up, but then the uncertainty and the dissatisfaction that comes from overriding rules that you committed to is a reinforcing feedback that adds to the uncertainty. And then that feeling gets in the way about being able to re-enter or not, because you've already violated the rules once on the exit. So now I've justified why I wouldn't follow my own rules to re-enter. So that's an endless loop of feedback that you got to get in front of. So the answer here, he says, is of psychological nature rather than technical in the matter of preparations, with respect, Pavel. So I could not agree more. So that triggered me to want to talk a little bit about mindfulness. And that leads us to the rest of the story. This was so funny. So today is my 63rd birthday, and I get to do whatever I want on my birthday. And what I like to do more than anything else is teach. So in this story at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, I'm logging in to go to webinar, and I get an error message. And it won't let me log in as the owner. It lets me log in, and so I can see the session, and it has me listed in there as a participant, but not as the owner or the presenter. And then there's a little button over here that lets me assign myself to the presenter if it runs into a problem, but it wouldn't accept that. So then I tried to quit so I could just restart, and it wouldn't let me quit. And so then I went to the session, and I said, well, let me just cancel it here. It wouldn't let me because the session was in session. So I got stuck in this do loop where what seems like a ghost session was running. And then Lisa and others tried to join, and they saw this, but it was saying, hey, owner's having technical difficulties, check back later. So we couldn't break the chain that way. So I went into Task Manager and found the processes that were for GoToMeeting, and I canceled them all, and then tried to restart, and I continued to get this do loop. So even though I had canceled that, so I tried it again. I tried it 3 times. Then I rebooted the entire computer, and I kept getting that. I went to another computer and experienced exactly the same thing. So now I'm 60 minutes into this ritual, and like a good mule, I'm either going to fix this or I'm going to die. I'm just not going to quit. And the funny thing of all this is that today's topic is about mindfulness and managing stress under environmental conditions and what to do about it. And so as I'm watching my mental state in all of these, I'm going through this increasing level of emotional charge. I'm going to call it that way. So charge is going up. And I'm aware of that with one part of my brain. I'm seeing that. And on another one, the emotional charge, the rat brain is just going up. So finally, I go to tech support, and they don't have a number that you can call right away. So I have to first go through their FAQ and their chat and confirm that my particular issue is not answered. Then and only then they give me a ticket number, and then I can use that to call somebody. I call the young gentleman, and in about 10 minutes, he gives me a set of directions. What he tells me to do is exactly what I have been doing on 2 different machines for an hour. That is, go into Task Manager, find the instances of GoToWebinar, cancel them, restart it. Only this time, I think on his end, on the server end, he canceled the session, or it was just magical, because this time when I canceled it, it then let me go back in and restart. There was no longer a go session, and it worked like a champ. So that was just a little moment of magic. So I spent a minute with him laughing about the fact that on Saturday morning, on my birthday, while trying to prepare and deliver a lecture on mindfulness, I was experiencing some environmental conditions that had the natural response of raising my emotional charge. And I more or less was able to use my mindfulness and standoff to observe and note and laugh about all this, which gave me the willingness to continue to be persistent about what I'm doing. Because no matter what, I'm going to get the outcome that I want. Because this is not a useless activity. This is the most important thing that I'm doing this morning on my birthday, and that is teach the lesson that I want to teach about mindfulness while experiencing mindful moments, which is connected to what I'm going to talk to Pavel about. Now, the deeper story on this one and some of the other connections that I want to make. So I've already talked about the walking man and the 5 locations of knowing: head, heart, gut, hands, and feet. Rational mind, spiritual, ideal mind, fear and emotions and greed and unmindful responses to the moment of the gut, the how to do things with your hands, and then how to do that with endurance and resilience on a long journey, punctuated by roundabouts. Those moments in which we can rest, recover, reconnoiter, reset, re-energize, relate to others, which comes from a place of safety, trust, truth, and then when you depart, to the possibility of opportunity, which are also the logic and feeling chain of true storytelling, which talks about how deep roots, which come from nature and nurture, get shaped into organizational structures which channel your perceived choices along these branches, which is where that structural racism comes from, and then manifest as leaves or events. And I got to go talk to the founder and suggest that, there's a 4th element of this called seeds, that the fruit of this tree and wherever you are then goes out to propagate this process in the world. And that unless you do something differently, whatever you do is going to get you what you've always got. And so the principles of true storytelling are a way to use safety, trust, truth, and opportunity to change this supply chain and manufacturing process to generate the seeds that you want to see manifest in the world. If you connect this to the iceberg model, where there's certain visible things and the deep roots, there's a real resonance in those different metaphors. So all of these things are kind of coming into play. So I'm thinking hard about mindfulness because I see that from my practice as the top level concept of what I've just called for me the 0 state, which is that state of mind, that state of no mind, pure being, where you and the sword are one. So the sword representing action in the world for a purpose, is a tool with purpose, and the bowl representing that moment of rest and reflection and contemplation where the input from the day is resolved, and then when you can empty that bowl and all that's left is the bowl, is that perfect moment of reflection and self-awareness of being in the world but not of the world. And the sword in action creates those results that we reflect upon, and then those reflections allow us to use the sword more purposefully, which then can be used as a tool for giving life and responding to life to better shape and mold the wooden bowl that we're cutting and creating. And so in that continuum of being and knowing and doing and reflecting, we have this sort of continuous moment of Zen and being in the world, that perfect harmonious balance between action and non-action. And at the cutting edge of no mind and 0 state, for me, is the moment of best mindfulness so that when I am in the world and events happen, I can then engage in right action because of the state of harmony between me and the world and my place in it. So my journey along this path started when I was in junior high, and I was reading Arthur Waley, 3 Ways of Thought in Ancient China, where he talked about the Buddha, the Tao, and Confucius. How to self-regulate and be mindful in the world and understand the difference between wanting and needing and the 4 Noble Truths. Taoism, about that relationship between you and the world, one of harmony and completeness that goes beyond the ability of rationality to explain fully. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. And then Confucius, who talks about a human society and how to do that with ethics and morals and intention, and regulate a society in a way that allows individuals to fully manifest while also accommodating an enlightened state. And that when the emperor, who represents figuratively that relationship between the people and the heavenly glory, he has the mandate of heaven when he is able to align the principles of heaven with the people and represents the harmonious continuity of life and death in the eternal circle. And when he's out of that alignment and is living for himself and not through selfless service, then he loses the mandate of heaven, which creates the turmoil and frustration until a new enlightened emperor takes over. So I've been reading that stuff since I was 10. And have been reflecting on that. I later added things like Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Socrates and all that. So on this little journey of self-reflection, various moments and other ideas have come into wherever I happen to be at the time. Well, in the area of mindfulness, in my doctoral program, a gentleman named Ron Purser, a distinguished scholar, was one of my teachers. He's also a Korean Zen ordained Buddhist minister, and he's very interested in mindfulness. And his book, Mindfulness, talks about, from his perspective, the co-option of the Eastern spiritual tradition that he is steeped in and a student of and a practitioner of, and how this has become corporate and exploited and disconnects the spirit from the practice and allows this to be used as a tool in the world for other than the original purpose that he experienced on his spiritual journey. And so he's written about that. Well, there's a lively philosophical and scholarly debate about what is mindfulness and how is its role in the world. And there is a spiritual element. There is just a cognitive practice element that is disassociated with, I would call it sectarianism or philosophical spiritual tradition, but looks at it strictly as a cognitive technique, which runs the risk of using a technique that was discovered by others with a spiritual tradition, but then disassociating. Does it have the same meaning, and what does it mean in the world? So that's kind of a lively tradition. Well, I have been thinking hard about bringing some kind of teaching, coaching, and mentoring about mindfulness with respect to developing the zero state in order to help us with our craft knowledge of trading. And I come to it without a particular denominational element, because before I ever knew any of all of this stuff here, as a 10-year-old, I'd been reading the original translations and just sorting it out on myself and doing my own reflective practice and living in the world. And so I want to respect the deep scholarship of my friend and account for what I perceive as the typical exploitation of good mental habits and traditions for the purpose exclusively of exploiting for profit. Because I see that not just in mindfulness, but also in coaching and storytelling. So when I come back over here to the storytelling and true storytelling, I see a lot of corporate shills who are talking about the use of narrative and storytelling to get ahead in the corporate world to exploit opportunities, which I believe are a poor application in principle of sound techniques. Like there's a lot of biological and psychological reasons why story is so powerful in the brains that we have inherited as a result of evolution. The era of evolutionary adaptation has generated this incredible brain that uses story and word maps to give us a cognitive competitive advantage in the world. And so just by our very wiring, but then also our cultural traditions, story is incredibly powerful. So like any other tool, like if you don't use these principles of safety, trust, truth, and opportunity, and you engage in untrue storytelling or manipulative storytelling, yeah, you could easily get into rhetoric or just outright lying. Have you ever experienced anybody lying in the world for their own purposes? Yeah, maybe once or twice. Isolated examples. So that phenomenon of taking something that is a power tool and available in the world now says the intention and the purpose with which you use the tools and gifts you've developed now matters the most, because you can do true storytelling or you could be a lying, cheating son of a gun. Well, mindfulness is no different from that. And so as I'm thinking about what it is that I can do to help us all with our trading so that we can generate returns in the world that allow us to achieve our end state, our vision of what's possible in the world and the seeds that we want to plant and the legacy that we can contribute to the world, I'm mindful of this possibility and my respect for my friend. So I'm engaged in a process where I'm taking all of the literature or real samples of the critiques of corporate mindfulness, which would be the exploitative use and manipulation of mindfulness for nefarious purposes, about which my friend has written a beautiful book and about which he is engaged in some dialogue with people I believe are genuine practitioners who take who push back against his characterization of all the people who use mindfulness but without a spiritual tradition as being inherently bad. There are some people who take a non-spiritual approach to this, who say this is a set of cognitive skills that are validated and provably good in the world, and you can choose how to raise your awareness in a mindful way in order to take more effective action in the world, but without necessarily following a particular spiritual tradition, although this is not to say that those are not equally valid. It's just a different choice. So that's the nature of that discussion. And so I'm reading the various scholarly treatments of this problem in the world of misappropriation of mindfulness for poor purposes, but also looking at what I think are legitimate, justified, standalone cognitive practices that can help us improve the way we think, act, and be in the world, that are consistent with all the values that I have, that don't disrespect spiritual traditions, but don't require spiritual traditions to manifest. And so I think there is some honorable space inside here where I can simply just tell the story of what I have experienced and what I think about it, and offer the tools that I have found useful and which I have seen to be useful in others. And so this mindfulness course is what I announced last night, that I've now decided, having gone through all this, that it's worth doing and putting this into the world in the way that I see. And as long as I'm being safe, trustworthy, truthful, I believe there's an opportunity for us to do better. And so the traders in the community who I believe are who would find this to be of most use would be the active traders. And so folks that are on Patreon at the silver, gold, or platinum levels, I'm going to make available this mindfulness course, which is based on the principles of positivepsychology.com, because they have world-class validated courseware in positive psychology for not only mindfulness, but resilience, emotional intelligence, and self-development. So I'll be doing a course on each one of those because I've taken those courses from them and have invested in the accreditation and credentialing of it to be able to teach it in an honorable way. So I'll be presenting the application of these various courses, starting with mindfulness, and making that available to the silver, gold, and platinum members, because we have swing traders, day traders, and hybrid traders that I believe can benefit from the mindfulness as we engage in the world. Which gets me exactly back to the start point of Pavel's question, because Pavel's question is entirely about how to be mindful in the world. So, just to review, what to do about those sideways quiet channels and getting chopped up and down, or essentially the more general case is really is this. You can think of this as, oh boy, I guess I need to do that differently. Try a new one. Save. There we go. Yeah, that was strange. So this is really about the very nature, or the essence of our trading has to do with the critical state. And the critical state is one that has max uncertainty. So no matter what else you can say about our style, you just know that in execution, so when we think about plan, prepare, execute, assess, by our very planning, we are looking to find the most critical state, which is even more max uncertainty plus. We're planning to be there, looking for the most extreme conditions in order to maximize the uncertainty, which leads to the maximum opportunity, but which has inherently danger in it, which needs to be managed with safety first. And then you've got to have a structure in place to lock in safety, some scaffolding that you can then trust. What kind of scaffolding do you trust? Is it professional? So, in a world filled with some professionals and many amateurs, if you are using professional grade scaffolding, you have an edge against the masses. And I respect all of them as free-willed people who could decide to become professional or not. That's their call. And I trust them to do what's right for themselves. I'm not responsible for their choice. I'm responsible for my integrity. So professional scaffolding is something that justifies a feeling of trust up to a point with a certain degree of confidence, not absolute trust, but earned confidence. How do you earn confidence in a process or a scaffolding? What does that have to do so that you are justified in allocating a certain amount of trust, which we could then characterize as a risk-reward trade-off decision, so in my core capital, my bag of seeds, the output of every action and process that I take, the net, is what goes into my bag of seeds. And those bag of seeds need to be planted in ground that may permit the flowering. And because this is a challenging long-term event, and trees can't move very fast, I have to be very judicious about how and where I plant my seeds, and then care and tend that ground in order that this has a positive return. So trust. So now what matters in all that is truth, and data, and evidence, and replicability, and validity. We might think of these as having criteria for judging the truth content of claims. And that's why, to me, your results are the things that matter. Not my results, but your results validated by you, because it's your decision to put trust in some kind of professional scaffolding in order to take on risk and reward. So now you can see the challenge of adopting a strategy which by its very nature and essence is looking for the most critical states with maximum uncertainty as a function of planning, because this is where the max opportunities are in terms of risk and reward. And if we can manage the risk, if we can prepare our scaffolding, which is the trade frame, then we can, in execution, execute with no mind and deal with the uncertainty that comes to take us off our zero state, and our ability to receive those feelings and experience all of these signals from the world about reasons why you should be uncertain, some of which come bubbling up through our, if this is our level of conscious awareness, that gut is receiving all of these messages from the environment, and all those messages from our memories and previous experience all come bubbling up to the surface. And so if you're just trying to deal with that with your rational mind, but haven't accommodated the natural process of your gut and heart, then of course the rational mind, which built a plan in the planning and went through preparing, but which was not experiencing the execution, feels unprepared for all these messages that come up in time. So you just need to expect that that's going to happen because of the very choices that you make on how you plan and prepare. So how to execute with no mind is now a matter of extreme importance. And I'm going to suggest to you that the edge comes from having prepared professional scaffolding. I should make that blue because that's ugly. So the preparation is everything, so that execution can be nothing, or no mind, or simple. And then if we survive, which we will because we have planned our risk management and asset allocation, that percentage is a separate decision from the particular scaffolding. That we say, no matter how professional we make our scaffolding, we're going to step outside of that particular trade frame and just say, no matter what, as a second degree of protection, we're going to ensure that for certain time frames of trading that we do not exceed our portfolio exposure for any particular trade frame. So, in my view, the dollars at risk per trade is the asset allocation decision, which is dealing with that bag of seeds, your core capital, which is your precious legacy for future potential. So how much of that seed bag are we going to allocate into any professionally designed piece of scaffolding? Well, some amount, not all in. If you go all in, there is some non-zero chance of failure. And Ed Thorpe tells us that if you ever expose yourself to a condition under which you could be completely wiped out, then it's just a matter of time, given the law of large numbers. And we want to trade more often, not less often, because when you have an edge, you want to trade as many times you can at the lowest level of risk to achieve your financial objectives as possible so that you can gain the expectancy. We want to think like the house. Not the individual gambler. The house is not gambling. They are processing. So I want to draw the distinction between asset allocation and the professional scaffolding, each of which are their own separate decisions, so that your chief of staff, who's responsible for the overall replicable business process, has to ensure that you're doing both of those things to a professional standard, so that when you get into the execution and you inevitably start receiving these messages from the environment and your memory, that you can process that into useful activity so that you can still, with your hands, you want to be able to reconcile your gut and your head so that you can take action in the world to achieve the vision of your heart. You have to know how to do that with professionally competent hands. The combination of heads and hands and the experience of your feet of doing it many times, those three things create the trade frame, the scaffolding to a professional standard that allows you to satisfy the warnings of your gut. Remember, the gut doesn't know any of this stuff. Your gut's only job is to look out into the world for risks. We optimize our gut to go find risks. It doesn't know anything about here. It's not looking back and judging the quality of our professionalism. That's not his job. His job is to go out and find those risks, announce them, and then let the head and the chief of staff say, have we accounted for all the risks that he continues to find? And if so, acknowledged, put that in the data bank, and just say, the consequence of having an aggressive risk identifier is that you're going to get a lot of warnings about risks all the time that you already have a professional response to. It's not his job to say, oh, I was going to tell him about this risk that I saw, but I believe that they have good risk management, so I'm going to restrain by. I don't want him thinking about that. I want him aggressively looking for risks. That's the chimpanzee mind. So expect that stuff. Now what you have to have is the fireman who knows how to execute the initial stages of the trade with no mind. He's trained and rehearsed that so many times that he is automatically doing things with no mind because he has trust invested in professional execution. So you have professional scaffolding, you have professional asset allocation to make sure you don't take on too much risk, professional scaffolding for each and every trade so that you can rely on the protection of multiple layers of defense to get you out of trades if they start going against your position. And then you have to have trust in the professional execution of your firemen. Now, what's it going to take to do that? It's going to take reps. How many reps do you need? 1,000? You need 1,000. Why do I say 1,000? Because the guys who endure have reported that somewhere around 600 to 800 trades in practice, fully professionally efforted, with good planning, good prep, good execution, continuous assessment, it still took 600 to 800 trades to have internalized all of the learnings of your head, heart, gut, hands, and feet to be able to invest trust in the professional execution so that you don't get overwhelmed by this continuous barrage of alerts and uncertainty messages from the guy who was supposed to be doing that. Roger, got it, noted, moving on. So you have to have a way to process that. And every time that you receive an alert message and you process it and you execute it properly is a reinforcement that you have integrated head, hands, heart, gut, feet into a unified trading machine, artist, meister, craftsman. And you know that because you have taken all of those data points and performed the assessment, and the law of large numbers and statistics tells you when you look at your histogram, you can see that you have not taken losses greater than 1R, that you have between -1 and +2, you have positive expectancy, and the average R per trade is slowly and incrementally moving forward. And third check, you have some gains periodically greater than 2R. So you're open to the fat right tail. When those three things are in place, then you have validated an integrated professional trading scheme that allows you to deal with the uncertainty that you're feeling. So what do you got to do? You got to get in the weight room and do the reps at low levels of risk. Start with paper trading and then trade one share live forward until you have hundreds of case studies. And then you assess them carefully, and then you've generated the data that gives you the objective measures of truth that allows you to decide how much confidence that you can invest in the professional scaffolding and the professional execution and the professional asset allocation and risk management and the professional assessment of your own performance. That's what I am here to help you do as your coach and your objective analyst, because I'm not in your fishbowl. You're looking at from inside your fishbowl, and you've accumulated evidence, and you've drawn some conclusions, and you wonder, hey, am I reading this right? And that's where your learning community can come in and say, well, we've looked at the data, double-blind and peer review. We've looked at your data. These are the conclusions that we draw, and now you can compare your conclusions to our conclusions and then make a professional judgment about your ability to self-assess. That is the power of collaborative learning. So I say all that in order to say the following. I hear them upstairs staging for our journey to birthday dinner. So, in conclusion, Pavel, what you got to remember is that you have been framing a critical state, in this case, an SQC. That little box, when you draw that trading box around there, and this is the yellow zone, you have to internalize that everything inside that little yellow box is noise. It's all noise. It's noise in the box. So it doesn't mean anything other than we're alive and there's noise. When you have established that scaffolding and you've said, this is my price entry level and this is my price entry level the other way, you've constructed a scaffolding that says, of all the price activity this thing went through, it narrowed down and got necked into this tiny structured box that now gives me a critical state, defined as an increased probability of a large move in either direction in a shorter than average period of time. That if this thing is normally moving like this, and in this critical state, it's either going to do this or that, large moves either direction in short periods of time that we can carefully manage. Because we have seen and studied all of its previous price behaviors and identified that this moment, structured in a particular way, gives us the critical state that gives us the advantage. We don't have a directional bias. We just know that in the yellow zone, if it breaks out, I'm justified in framing and going without thinking any further, because I've done all the thinking and the planning and the prep in here like the professional that I am. And so when I get those messages of uncertainty, that's coming from the place where my chimp, who's looking out at the world, says, yeah, we're at a moment of maximum uncertainty. There's a lot of risks. Got it. Noted. You're doing what you're supposed to do. So you just got to handle that. You got to handle that noise. And when that message comes in, you got to put it into the place that says, got it. Noted. Here's your banana, chimpanzee. Well done. And it does not cross the firewall to interfere with the fireman. So you know how the fireman goes into the building and does it? You know what they do? They erect a safety zone around here and keep all the I almost said the dumb shits. It keeps all the external people away so that this guy has a space to do his job, and he turns off all that noise. The same way professional athletes have practiced that foul shot hundreds of thousands of times so they can perform under pressure. That takes repetitions. And then assessment to make sure that the fireman's doing the best he can do. You got to get 1,000 reps to begin to say that you are professional in execution. And you have to do multiple assessments of those data sets in order to say, I am professionally assessing my performance. That's what you got to do. So, when you see that little sideways quiet channel, whatever that thing is, you gotta be firm in your trade frame and live with it. How do you learn to ignore all that noise? By looking at the size of the trade. When you know that your asset allocation is sound, you know that this is just a science project. Trade one share. Risk $1. You've got skin in the game. That's going to generate all the uncertainty. It will. It always does. But your rational mind can say, I can take that heat because my asset allocation has allowed me to structure this as a practice session so that I can learn if this scaffolding works for me. and then you adjust the scaffolding to account for your results after you have a lot of repetitions, a lot of numbers. So keep doing the work, get in there and carve your bowl, study the results, record them, engage in planning, preparation, execution, and assessment, and do the work. And become professional at each one of those. Preparation and execution and assessment and plan. The planning is the easiest one. There's a gazillion things that give us critical states. The preparation is the first step, but it's not the only step. You got to be professional in execution. That's why the Wu Wei exit is the perfect blend of the rational mind of the manager plus the emotional mind of the sniper, and by giving each one half of the position, you get rid of all the uncertainty of, should I be a manager or should I be a sniper? Split the difference and just go. Figure it out and then use the results to come back and refine the manager's rules and the sniper's rules. Get data to make that decision. Just split the difference and go. You got to go and execute correctly so that you can assess a large number of reps in order to make the decisions. That's how you get better in a world that continually changes so much, and you need to use data to adapt your processes so that you remain aligned. There's more of that coming, not less. This is a world of chaos, and it's going to stress test every traditional, unchanging, unadaptive model out there until it breaks them, and the only ones that are left are going to be the ones that can learn. Do you want to be a one that can learn and adapt and respond to data professionally? Then do the work. If you want to just be a gambler, gamble. Make your choice. We're all grown people, and we got choices to make. That's what I want to say about professionalism, asset allocation, and mindfulness on my birthday. And now it's time to go eat a triple cheeseburger wrapped in lettuce with steamed broccoli and butter, because that is keto, baby. Ketogenic diet. Exercise every day. Walk your dogs. Get into the zero state. Look forward to the mindfulness course, because I'm looking forward to starting teaching of it so I can learn what I can learn. But chaos, that's the world out there. That's not a word to fear. It's a word to recognize and to deal with it. So deal with it. Take good care, guys. We'll see you in the chat room. Next podcast tomorrow night at 8 on Sunday night to take a look at trade frames. If you don't put any trade frames in the chat room, then I'm not going to analyze them, and I'll just analyze my own. But that's the deal. Okay? Take good care, and we'll see you tomorrow night.